Okay, so I left this up like this. I think most of you have been to a talk of mine, but being in accessibility, once you go full screen, before you do that, you can turn on captions here in Google Slides, and that's why I like to use Google Slides. I do text position. I'm not sure it's going to work because I'm working offline, so it's probably not going to do it, but I cannot see here. I do text size, usually large to medium, and then I put them at the top. But it looks like it's not going to do it because I'm offline. But that's what I do for captions when we don't have them available. So, but does anyone need captions? Because I can go online. Okay. And the reason I put them at the top is because sometimes they're no longer closed captions, they're open captions, so you can't, unless you do like film editing, they're going to be on there. And then the captions at the bottom, all that kind of stuff. And people can see them from the back of the room, all that. But this is not a talk about Google Slides. This is a talk about accessibility tips for social media. There are images in my slide deck. Most of them are there to reinforce the concept. So I'm not going to describe them unless, they're there mostly for decoration. So, and there's the link to slides, and they're also on the Drupal Camp Asheville website. My name is AmyJune Hineline. Everyone in the room knows that. I work for the Linux Foundation. I am the certification community architect, which means I don't do anything really. I rely on other people to help me do the things that I need to get done. So I'm a SME wrangler. I'm Volkswagen chick across all of the things. Okay, so today we'll talk about why accessibility matters in social media. We'll talk about a lot of the barriers that some people have when trying to ingest or consume your data. And we'll talk about practical tips for creating more inclusive posts. I do have some real world examples, which is nice. And we'll talk about existing workflows that we might have in social media and how we can start using things right away. So why does accessibility matter in social media? When we think about these like quick bites of information. There's this growing awareness of accessibility, which is sort of nice, or it's very nice. It's not just sort of nice. It's really nice that people are thinking more about accessibility. It's not just accessibility experts that are talking about accessibility now. There's new regulations that have come into place, especially in the EU. So it's bringing like all of these conversations in more of the public space than just like a couple of stakeholders and stuff like that. There's also this broader reach, when our content is accessible, it means that more people can access it. Mike Anello sent me an article the other day about 98%. You're 98% there, but think about that 2% that isn't. And we're a global population, we have a global audience now, especially after the pandemic. 2% of a global audience is massive. It's massive. So it not only includes people with disabilities, but it includes people who watch videos, right? My kids increasingly require captions. They want the captions on, That wasn't the case when I was a kid. It was just something new and you had to fiddle with it and that sort of thing. But it's for people in noisy environments like on BART, on the airplane, when people have their phones on and you're super annoyed, it's maybe because that video doesn't have captions on it. So all of these trends are making it more important than ever. It's not just compliance anymore. It's like people expect and kind of demand inclusivity. I mentioned this. I'm not going to ask if people know what it is, and this isn't a talk about guidelines and expectations, but this is a really important development that just happened last June, I think. It's the European Accessibility Act, and it's a directive that really strives to improve accessibility and products and services across all of the member states. All of the member states. It was designed because each state in the European Union had different rules, and it was really hard to be compliant. So if your product or service is used in the EU, you must have this. You must comply with all the standards. We think about WCAG, the WCAG standards here a lot. They're a good start, but this actually is more regulatory. People are getting fines, and they're big, hefty fines as well. So, and that, like I said, products, services, media, any sort of digital content, it's environmental content as well. So, and like I said, every business. And disability is not one thing. I'm using our Ally Talks stickers here. Each kitty has something different going on with them. You can see, like, one of them has a boo-boo. One of them might be blind. One's missing his tail. So there's these sort of broad categories for disability. We talk about permanent disabilities, and that's what a lot of people think about when we talk about disabilities, that disability that doesn't go away. They live with it 24/7. But there's temporary disabilities. This is like recovering from hand surgery, so maybe don't have all the use of your mouse and that sort of thing. There's situational disabilities, and I talk about this a lot because I take the train and I had a kid and I'm scrolling on my phone, so I only have the one hand. I can't see worth a crud anymore, so if my glasses aren't right or whatever, or if they're dirty, smudgy, glare on my screen because I like to work outside. So those are temporary or situational disabilities. And then there's episodic, which a lot of people don't talk about, and this is the thing that flares. Diabetes is a episodic disability. I have Lyme disease, and I have, sometimes my eyes are blurry, sometimes my hip doesn't work, but it can be things like, having migraine headaches. It can be fatigue. We get tired, so that's a episodic disability. Last night we were watching the soccer game, and we were with our friend Lee, and the beer menu is up. This is a real-time thing. The beer menu's up. He's like, other words I can't say while I'm being recorded. But he couldn't see the beer menu. It was on one of those screens. And he says, the older I get, the more I appreciate accessibility. Just yesterday. So, and accessibility can shift depending on the device you're on. My website might not look the same on a tablet as it does on the phone. There's a concert venue I really like, and when they send me in, I look on my phone, the CSS is all the way off the page. Do you know what I mean? Things like that. It could be the sunlight like I talked about earlier. It could be that you're on your laptop at a desk. It could be that you're not using a mouse, that you're using just your keyboard. And it could be the environment. We talked about this, like lighting, noise, unreliable connectivity. That's a big thing with accessibility. If you think about just the inclusion aspect, my Wi-Fi in rural Hollister, I couldn't load pictures, and so not having alt text on there really mattered. Fatigue plays a role, pain, illness, all that kind of stuff. Cognitive load, for stressed out and we're multitasking, these all add to our ability to access information. And the same person may have different needs at different times of the day. So if someone can't access your content, the communication has failed. Social medias have some really unique communication challenges. If there's a barrier to your communication, you've lost your message. The image here is communication and a barrier to a lost message. And social media is different than our digital assets that we think about because they're the most widely used form of communication right now, social media. More people are checking social media than checking the New York Times, than going onto a website. It's the quick bites of information, right?
That makes me so sad.
And, yes. And unlike websites, well, it depends on who you work with when we talk about web development, but unlike websites, social media moves very quickly, very quickly. How often do you have to update an app, So accessibility is rarely ignored on purpose, really. It's more often it gets missed because of how social media teams work together or don't work together. Fast publishing cycles, doesn't leave very much time for review before the content goes live. Multiple platforms means teams are managing different features, workflows, and requirements. Limited training. I talk about this in another talk. If we train our developers and our designers about social media, we should be training our content developers too, because that's what changes the most is our content. So lack of training or lack of awareness of what makes communication accessible. And unfortunately, accessibility features are hidden. They're getting a little bit better, but they're inherently hidden in a lot of, especially when you're on your phone, right, and you're just doing something really fast. There are tools that help with that. Like I don't use one of the channels anymore, one of the platforms, but I had this indicator, I don't know if it was like a browser extension or what it was on my phone, but it blocked me from being able to post until I put alt text on my image. And that should be the way it is everywhere. So, and the result, like I said, it's not because people don't care, it just gets overlooked. So why does accessibility matter on social media? Oftentimes that's our first impression of a product or a team or a group or whatever you're looking at, It's the first interaction that we have with that product. Before someone even visits your website, right? Me and Chris joke around about this a lot, how we're scrolling our phone and we're talking, and the next ad we see is what we were talking about. So people aren't really visiting websites anymore and using Google or SEO. They're looking at the social media and the paid ads and that sort of things. So when those exist, people miss information entirely. And I have some good examples that I'm going to use from Ally Talks. Sometimes it could be that the event date is only in the image and then there's no alt text. And so people see that. I just did this the other day because I wanted people to go to the website, but they don't. They're looking at the post and they're like, well, it would be nice to know what the date was. And I'm like, crud. That's me not thinking about it, right? Because I wanted people to go to the website and get more information and sign up for the YouTube link, that kind of thing. So when your information is in that image, if people are using a screen reader or quickly browsing, they're not going to see the important information you wanted to convey. The video without captions or bad captions. Bad captions are just as bad as no captions at all, sometimes worse because they're distracting. A too difficult image to read, something that's blurry. We talk about this a lot with T-shirts for heavy metal. Mm-hmm. What's the name of that band? It's important. But accessible content tends to be better for everyone, right? When we write clearer, when we have better structure, when we have text alternatives to things like voice or music, and thoughtful formatting about how we design, it makes it easy to understand. Having clear structure helps it be predictable from page to page. A lot of older people, it's hard for them to consume information if the menu's on one side, or like the buttons and things. And I know that's not social media, but this is an example of how everyone uses the products a little bit differently. Okay, so I don't want to assume anyone's knowledge, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the POUR principles, P-O-U-R, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable means that people need to access the content through more than one sense. If it's only by touch, what if I have no hands? Or, what if, it's only by color and you're colorblind? And on social media, that might mean providing alt text, captions, and sufficient color contrast. Operable means that people should be able to interact with your content. Content creators can't necessarily control every aspect of the platform, but they can avoid creating the barriers that makes the information difficult to navigate. Understandable means that it should be clear, predictable. I talked about predictability, easy to follow. So this means on social media, using plain language, using meaningful hashtags, and well-structured posts. And I have some examples later on. And robust is the last one. It means that you should be able to access the content no matter how, with any sort of technology, assistive technology. So this could be a Braille writer. It could be, only doing keyboard navigation. It could be even like the browser that your content consumers are using. You know, I think when I worked at Red Hat, we only designed to like three browsers, and everything else was garbage. And we talked about that when I first got on there. I was like, accessibility was a big deal. But I had a really great team that worked with us, and we changed our website when we went from Drupal 7 to Drupal 9 or whatever we did. I don't know, but yeah. So people in Nigeria weren't able to consume our content because they were using Brave or Opera or one of those ones that we just don't think about. Social media platforms are far from perfect, but I think our content creators, like I said, we do them a disservice when we don't train them. So typical issues that we see that create barriers in social media. Then this is not a full list, but these are like the most common. You know, the images without the alternative text, videos without captions, only identifying something by color. So if you have, you know, like a pie chart that is just in color, people don't understand without the labels, you know, what information they're seeing. Hashtags that screen readers can't interpret. Emoticons, they're not very accessible, and I'm going to talk about each of these things a little bit more. Text embedded in the images, poor color contrast, and then fast-moving GIFs for people who live with VIMs.
Are there hashtags that screen readers can't interpret?
Oh yeah, we'll talk all about that. Well, I'll give you an example right now. My name is AmyJune, A-M-Y, capital J-U-N-E. But when my doctors put my name in the machine, they don't capitalize that J.
Yeah.
So instead of AmyJune, it's read AmyJune.
Okay.
That's just a...
So they read it, but they read it incorrectly.
Right, exactly. They can't parse it, and we'll talk about that, yeah. And then fast-moving GIFs is like people who live with visually... what's the I stand for? Visual induced motion sickness, VIMS. So those fast-moving GIFs, they can be distracting, they can make people sick. Most of it's like distraction. So, but we see that all the time on social media, right? The GIFs that don't turn off or just are yucky. So that first one, images and alt text. We love images. They are great. They lead to better ROI, return on investment. People are more likely to click on your content when there's an image, period. We include images and media to support and add to our information as well, because some of these, like Blue Sky, have very limited characters, but the alternative text on an image can convey a lot more information. You know, I think the limit is like twice as long as the post itself for the alternative text. And also when we have images, it helps people maybe on a larger screen, like be able to come back to the information in a good spot. It helps with the layout. It helps people who live with low vision use those visual clues. There was one more thing I was going to say, but I don't remember, but I'll probably talk about it. Sorry. Yes. Okay, I'll remember. Okay, so I sort of jumped ahead on this one. The accessible images, you know, help people who have using screen readers when images are turned off on your browser. Like this morning, I couldn't connect to the internet, so I was using the slower internet, and like none of my images were loading, right? And it's just the little broken one. Some people have images turned off because it's distracting, you know, and they just want the content. And when we have alternative text, now your image is able to be indexed by search engines because it's text and they can parse that. I'm not saying put a bunch of keywords in your alt text, but it becomes search engine optimal. And that's something that you can bring up with your marketing team, right? Like, you know, there's another way to get focus. I just read this thing on LinkedIn the other day that SEO is kind of getting lost because people aren't clicking on websites anymore. They're using the AI synopsis at the top now. So, but maybe that'll end soon. We'll see. But so when people first start writing alt text, they focus on describing everything that's in the image, and that's not the purpose for that. Unless it's like an art catalog or something like that. Alternative text is really about communicating meaning So sometimes the color of the balloon doesn't matter. So, but I see that as a common mistake when people first start writing alternative text. If you have long, cumbersome alternative text, people won't read it either. The people who are going with the screen readers are going to, exit out of it. So it's about meaningful. So you start with purpose. You ask yourself why you included the image and what role it plays in the post. An image used to announce an event needs different alternative text than the same image used to celebrate a speaker, right? So the same, and there's a little bit of a problem in Drupal with this, with the media library. You have an image and you put the alt text in, and then you want to use that image for another article, but the context is completely different. So I don't know if there's a solution for that, but yeah, so and then when you can't remember, but yeah, consider that context. The alt text should work together with the surrounding message, so that someone with a screen reader receives the same information as someone who's accessing the image visually. Video accessibility. Video accounts for the vast majority of internet traffic these days. And social media posts featuring video generate 1,200% more shares than texts and images combined. So we think about some of these like TikTok sort of things, and 1,200% more shares than text and images alone. So I have some statistics. Massive engagement. Tweets with videos receive 10 times more engagement than text-only tweets. You shouldn't be on Twitter, but I have that bit of information. Viral reach. Platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram account for 60% of product discovery. Those images or the videos is product discovery, and they outrank traditional search engines these days. The conversion power of videos, 85% of consumers say video has helped them make a buying decision. We're gonna go get a shovel and we're looking at the videos and what shovel, is doing the shoveling better, it's a thing.
You can get ads for shovels now.
Oh yeah. That's okay because we need a shovel.
Okay.
So there's a lot of different kinds of shovels. I just want everyone to know. Like, it's amazing. You go into the hardware store and you're like, but this isn't a talk about shovels. Short form videos has seen 75% increase in global consumption. That's global. Short form videos, that's the video less than 90 seconds. Users are spending an enormous amount of time on TikTok and Instagram Reels. There's platform-specific links. Optimal videos links vary from platform to platform depending on what you want for maximum reach. Younger folks have been known to want quick bites of information, so the videos are shorter on different platforms that are more geared towards younger audiences. The best performing TikTok averages 2 minutes. Instagrams are 60 to 90 seconds, and Facebook Reels hit their sweet spot around 60 seconds. So captions, what are captions? They provide synchronized text for that spoken dialogue. And they should include those important sounds that you hear, like if you're watching a horror movie. It's important to hear. Yeah, or it's important to hear the thunder or the creaking of the boards and things like that. It allows deaf and hard of hearing users to have that same experience that people are accessing with their hearing. Transcripts, they provide a complete text version of the spoken content in videos. I have a friend who does not watch the videos, but he'll do the transcripts because he can listen to it at a quicker speed. And he does that on the video too, but it's hard to watch a video at quick speed. But that transcript, he'll play it like 3 times so he can watch, 3 videos in the time some of us take to watch the one. Audio clarity has a significant impact on on how we access the information. You know, clear audio without excessive background noise helps users understand the spoken information and improves the accuracy of the captions if people are using assistive technologies or AI to help with their captions or videos. We went to a movie, and it was an older movie. What was it called? The Keep?
Oh, The Keep?
Yeah.
Thought you meant the
Oh, no.
person about it.
Well, that one too. The music was, I'm hard of hearing. The music was so loud that I couldn't access what the people were saying. And it was Tangerine Dream, so that made it even worse, right? And then having great playback controls. And sometimes you can't help this in your social media, but maybe it's something that you can do. And I just like to mention it because I like to be accessible as I can. You know, we want to make sure that our controllers allow our users to pause, replay, and adjust the video settings. So making sure you pick that good player. And then maybe adjusting like some of the content you create to the platforms that have better players, right? Or advocating to that platform to be like, I have this need, how can you help me address this, right? Change only comes when we ask for it sometimes. So I mentioned some of these before. Captions support all kinds of people, not just our deaf and hard of hearing friends, or people, you know, watching the videos without sound. It also helps people watching videos when there's a lot of noise around you too. So when there's no noise or a lot of noise, it helps non-native speakers. You know, if English is whatever language that you're speaking in your videos, if maybe you know, Spanish is their native language, it helps reinforce the English, right? You know, because I have a hard time picking up accents being hard of hearing, and so that those captions save me in an important movie or show that I'm watching or whatever. And again, it makes it indexable, right? When you have captions and transcripts, just like putting that alt text on the images. So hashtags and emojis. These are really popular. I have mixed feelings about them, and this isn't to talk about how AmyJune feels about emoticons. So, but you know, when you use them thoughtfully, they help you convey your message, a personality tone, an emphasis. Because there was a point when I was communicating on Slack that was very like flat. And people thought I was like always being like a little bit mad, or, you know, where's AmyJune? Why not? And so I'd, you know, a little heart at the end or something to make sure that, you know, it wasn't like whatever. But the challenge is that screen readers don't always interpret emojis the way sighted folks interpret them. A few screen readers announce the name of every single emoji they come across. So a few emojis can convey meaning, but a long string of emojis can be really distracting for people, especially if it's before the content. So, for example, a user may visually see a few celebratory icons. That's my favorite, like the little, you know, party popper. You know, that I think that's what it's called. So, is it called ta-da? Okay, ta-da. So think of, I don't have a picture of it. I'm sorry. I meant to do that. So if you see it and you like want to have a screen reader read it, it'll say like, ta-da, clapping hands, clapping hands, clapping hands, ta-da, 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 vomit emoji, you know, before you get to your content. And they're going to leave your message because it's just too much, right? And the same principle applies to hashtags as well. When hashtags are scattered throughout that post, you have some words being said, but then you have, you know, hashtag, 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 and all those emoticons, that kind of thing. And they can interrupt that flow of content. And even for sighted users, it can break up and, you know, you can miss some of the in-between words. So I like to tell people the simplest best practices is save those emoticons and hashtags to the end of your content, because that way they've read your information and they're not, you know, being bothered by it. With saying that, like the goal isn't to totally avoid hashtags, but use them intentionally to support your communication. So up here I have some examples of multi-word hashtags, and we talked about AmyJune versus AmyJune, real life example, you know. They're a small detail that can have a surprisingly large impact on accessibility. One best practice is to capitalize multi-word hashtags, using camel case or title camel case. For example, up here I have Black Lives Matter. It's kind of hard to parse altogether, right? We have social media accessibility. That's a long word, right, to parse. It also, when you camel case your hashtags, it avoids confusion. There's ambiguity here. So we have Dad's Scare or Dad's Care. We have whore members, maybe, or who remembers. Experts exchange, or expert sex change, or experts exchange. So the same hashtag, like read the wrong way, you're going to be like, okay, I don't understand what's going on. And then acronyms. Acronyms don't always mean the same thing to the same people. When BLM, lots of us in more modern times think of Black Lives Matter, but my grandpa, we camped on BLM land, Bureau of Land Management. So the same hashtag can have two different meanings. ADA, American Dental Association, or Americans with Disabilities Act. The goal here is to make hashtags as easy to read as possible, make them easier to understand and easier to interpret.
But a screen reader, what would it do with Dad's Scare?
If it's capitalized,
Oh, of course.
it'll recognize it as a new word.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
So it'll put different emphasis on the word?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. I had no idea.
Okay, so layout is a big deal. Forcing a lot of information into a small space can be overwhelming for some people. So when we talk about social media posts, and this is a good kind of rule in general when people don't read anymore, they're thumbing or scrolling. Having large blocks of text are inaccessible for some people. So we like to keep our paragraphs short. It makes the post easier to read on small screens, and it reduces cognitive load. I work in the exam community, and when we have scenario-based questions and people have to parse all this information, it's all in one paragraph. It makes the question more difficult than if we would have, separated it out a little bit. Logical line breaks, breaking up the content. It also makes it easier to navigate back to where you were if there's a line break. Using clear language, I sometimes call this global English, because in this global economy, I think the statistic was 78% of things are written in English, but not 78% of the global population doesn't read English. So using straightforward language helps ensure that our messages are understandable to that wider global market. And like I talked about before with the captions, it helps with people who they're non-native, and it also helps with people who have cognitive disabilities as well. I'm not saying dumb down your content, but make it more digestible. And again, avoiding those dense blocks of text. People are going to scroll right past it on social media. They're not going to stop and read it. So I have some examples of how to write accessible posts. So I'm using Ally Talks again. One of the common mistakes, and I talked about it a little bit, is event information only inside the image. So I have this post that says, join us in October, but all of the content that's really important is in that image, and I don't have alt text on there. People don't know that Kaylee and Irene are speaking. They don't know the name of the session. They don't know when it is. So, having all that event information inside the image, people are not going to join us. So what is this a picture of? I can't see it. Okay, so this is how to create an accessible post. You add the alternative text, and now, I don't know why I have this picture. Maybe it's just an example of how to add the alternative text, because the next picture, is that the same one?
I think so.
Okay.
Slightly different.
Okay, so now when I see this post, yes, it says join us in October, but when you hover over the alternative text, it says the name of the project, and you can't see it, it's down below, but it has all of the information, the date, all of that. Common mistake number 2 with social media is videos with no captions. This is Milo from The Descendants singing When I Get Old. And we know that this doesn't have captions because the CC is grayed out. Probably this video was put up so long ago that we didn't even think about that, right? So now we can see that there's subtitles. When you hover over, this is when you hover over it says subtitles and closed captions not available. Videos with bad captions, you know. So we know we can kind of parse what this is, right? It's Benedict Cumberbatch, but they got it all wrong to see Benedict couple beer patch. So if you're not familiar with the art or the actor, you would have no idea what's going on there. So sometimes bad captions are worse than no captions, right? Common captioning mistakes, poor color contrast or readability. You might have a video that's going, it's all sorts of scenes, all different colors, but your captions are all in white. And when it hits that light background over here, you can't see the captions because there's no background against the captions. Awkward line breaks. You know, we see this sometimes in some of the videos where, like, you have 2 or 3 words and it falls off into the next one. It makes it really harder. Sometimes captions fail to capture that sound, like I was saying in the horror movies. Auto-generated captions when they're left unreviewed. This is getting better, though. On Ally Talks, someone goes through and we have it automated, and then we go through and we edit it, and it's way different than when we first started, way different. And the pandemic sort of helped us with that, right? Like having all that Zoom, everyone on Zoom, it's able to parse the more technical words, or like Drupal was always like dripple or triple, you know. Captions that appear too quickly, you know, they go onto the screen and they fall off before. There's nothing like watching a video with someone and you're reading it and you know what's happening before the person who's actually can hear it, right? And then transcript style captions. These are large blocks of text that can really be overwhelming on the video. It makes the captions harder to use. So I always tell people, like, keep your captions concise, readable, and synchronized with the content. One of my favorite pieces of advice for captions is keep them boring. You know, it makes them easier to read, easier to follow, and they never compete with the content themselves. Because you'll see some of the social media where one word is larger, or they color the word as it's being said, and it's nutty. Okay, so here's Milo. This video is a little bit newer, and we can see there's captions on the screen. We can see that CC button is no longer grayed out, you know, indicating that. This is a great song, Sour Grapes. It's one of my favorite Descendants songs. Oh, look at that. There's my caption for my alternative text for Google Slides. Did you know Google Slides, you can put alternative text on your images? So I must have hit it twice, so that's what that is. Color-only communications, and we have bar graphs where there's preferences, right? And we see that if you didn't see the colors, you would have no idea about what information is being displayed. Same thing with line graphs, you know. Are people using Windows, Linux, or Mac? If you have a black and white monitor, or, you know, the glare, or you're colorblind, that information is useless. So, I did this because of the black and white, right? So looking at this, you know, we couldn't see the difference, but, you know, say something like you put in texture, or you do clear labels. We can see here that we know what it is because it's textured. It's not just going to be, you know, this helps, like, if you print things in black and white too. You know, we hardly have, when you go to the library, they don't print it in color for you, right? You know, and then we dotted the lines over there and gave it texture, so we know that not enough people use Linux. So we know why we don't use Linux, but This is the poor color contrast, you know. This is hard to read for some people, you know. And then this one is impossible for us to read, and I don't have a visual disability most of the time besides blurry. That's white on yellow and black on red. But when we think about our color contrast, now this is way better to read than that black, right? Now the black is on this side, you know, this is the difference. This is my cat Spot. He died last year, but he's a good guy. So cumbersome use of emojis and hashtags. This is the example I was giving. Like if you think about it, how we have the words mixed in, right? Look how he smells the flower, 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 flowers, flower, flower, flower. And look at my hashtag isn't capitalized at all. It says best cat ever. I'm not sure how you could read that differently, but you know, things happen. So when we make it where my cat Spot is the best, look how he smells the flowers, best cat ever at the end, and then my emojis at the bottom, right? One of the biggest myths about accessibility is that it's more work, that it's extra work that you put on to the team, you know, when you ask for them to make it accessible. In reality, accessibility feels like extra work because it's targeted after your content is finished. The posts get written, the images get created, the videos get published, and then someone asks, did I add alternative text? And now you have to go back, and sometimes that fix takes longer than writing that initial post. At that point, accessibility becomes rework. When we build it into the content creation process from the beginning, there's only a couple of things that you have to do. There's these small decisions, and start doing that practice, you know, you get the momentum. Writing alt text when the image is creating, reviewing the captions as you're writing them or as you're, you know, editing the video that first time takes far less work. It doesn't have to be an extra step, and the most sustainable approach is like doing it from the very beginning before you publish. I only have a couple minutes left. AI can help, but it can't verify. I always want to point that out. It's a great starting point, especially if you don't have a lot of time or you're volunteering and you want to do more stuff. Especially when people are working at a fast pace. It can generate the first draft, it can create captions, it can summarize transcripts, but these tools can save time that makes accessibility better, but it lacks context and intent. It may describe the image visually without understanding why we use the image. It can generate transcription errors. Think of it as an assistant and not that human review. Human in the loop. Carrie said that during her session too, keeping that human in the loop. The goal is that you can let AI handle the repetitive tasks, but it's really us as people who have to make sure that we do accuracy, tone, and meaning. A lot of it has to do with intent. You know, if you have a specific intent, AI does not know that. Like I said, in social media, it's not because we don't care, it's the lack of awareness, there's the time pressure, there's missing processes. We haven't trained our content editors to know not to use all of the bells and whistles in your editor. You know, maybe one of those things is to, when they're creating the content, don't give them all the things in the editor unless you train them on how to use it. Platform limitations and competing priorities. The competing priorities can be how we engage with the metrics, branding, content calendars, and limited resources, right? Like when I work with some of the projects, you know, there's only one of us doing captioning, one of us doing this, one of us doing social media, you know, and then when one of us falls off the planet because something happens, someone else has to step in and doesn't know that process, you know, so a lot of it's like documentation as well. I kind of talked about this, and like I said, I'm out of time. I want to be mindful for the next person. Draft the post, select your media, write with clarity, and then the content review right before publishing. Check if it has all of that stuff. It is so hard to go back and fix social media once it's published. Some of them you're not allowed to. So, you know, doing that double check right before the end really, really helps. Start small, build habits, make progress. You know, if you're managing hundreds of posts, you know, years of content or multiple channels, don't try to be perfect. You know, like do it meaningfully at first. You know, going back, like I help out with an exam group, and they have 15 years worth of PDFs that we're going back and fixing, and we have to be like, no, right now we're going to prioritize the content that we're building, and if we have time, go back. You know, so you know, it's not about creating those separate processes, but you know, building those into our workflows. This was sort of the quick checks, you know, the 5 things that you can do today: alt text, reviewing your captions, camel casing your hashtags, keeping key information outside of those images, and then structuring for readability. This is important. I worked at Red Hat, and we had meetings on Google Teams, and I needed captions, and we needed to have the chat open, and there'd be these big blocks of text. And so I wrote to the person who did the presentation, because when I put captions, all of a sudden the slides got really small. And he's like, AmyJune, you're just an edge case. And then 2 weeks later, someone gave a presentation at Red Hat that had this slide in there that when you call something an edge case, you're really defining the limits of who you care about. So that one person that you think is going to benefit from your actions, they're just as important as the other 99 people. And like Lee, it's interesting how today's edge case can be tomorrow's mainstream. We all experience these changes in our abilities and environment and all that kind of stuff. And thank you. Sorry to breeze through that last part, but... And I don't have time for questions.